Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are putting on our student hats and stepping into a bit of a masterclass. We're tackling one of the most structurally important, yet I think criminally overlooked, sections of corporate financial law.
I agree. It's the plumbing of corporate finance.
Exactly. So consider this your fast track to mastering Chapter 6 of the Companies Act, which dictates all the rules around the registration of charges. We'll be looking specifically at sections 77 through 87.
That's right. And when we talk about corporate charges, it might just sound like bureaucratic paperwork, but conceptually, we're defining the very architecture of public trust in corporate finance.
Hmm.
So the mission today isn't just to recite legal requirements, it's to really understand the why. Why did Parliament create this mandatory, highly time-sensitive regulatory framework?
Right. What problem was it trying to solve?
Exactly. It's the essential mechanism that protects lenders, the banks,
Yeah.
from bad faith borrowers, and it protects future investors and other creditors from hidden liabilities. It's
Yeah.
all about transparency.
And the stakes, while they could not be higher. If you miss these rigid registration deadlines, you don't just pay a fine, you fundamentally lose your status as a secured creditor.
You're out. You trade first dibs on an asset for a place at the very back of the queue. It's a catastrophic failure for a lender.
Absolutely. So we're aiming for academic mastery, but also real-world clarity here. We'll define what a charge is. We'll dissect the critical difference between fixed and floating charges.
Untangle those complex deadlines imposed by Section 77, which are a bit of a minefield.
They really are. And then we'll examine the chilling effect of what's called constructive notice and trace the charge's life all the way through modification and finally satisfaction.
So let's start at the beginning, the conceptual foundations. What exactly are we dealing with when a company offers up its assets as security?
Okay, let's unpack this core concept. When a business needs growth capital or, just working funds, it turns to debt. And when a bank or any lender extends a loan, they almost always require security. That interest, that claim on the company's assets, it needs a precise legal definition.
And a law provides one. The strict legal terminology defines a charge in Section 216 of the Companies Act. It states that a charge is, and I'll quote it, an interest or lien created on the property or assets of a company or any of its undertakings, or both as security and includes a mortgage.
That phrase is extremely precise, isn't it?
It is. It's the legal mechanism that establishes a specific claim against a specific asset, and that claim exists until the debt is fully repaid.
So let's use an example. If Pearl Electronics Limited goes to Everest Commercial Bank for a term loan and offers its swanky corporate headquarters as security, that security interest is the charge.
Exactly. And the moment that charge is created, the clock starts ticking for public registration. The scope here is also incredibly wide. The law doesn't really care where the property is. It could be within India, outside India, or what form it takes.
So we're talking about the obvious stuff, the tangible assets like land, the building, machinery.
Right, but also the crucial intangible assets. Things like patents, copyrights, trademarks. I mean, in today's economy, intellectual property is often the most valuable security a tech company owns. If it has value and can secure a loan, it can be charged.
That's a huge point. We also need to note the special case of an equitable mortgage by the deposit of title deeds. It sounds a bit old-fashioned, but it's still very common.
Very common. And that's governed by Section 58 of the Transfer Property Act, 1882. But the key takeaway for our purposes is that even that less formal mechanism, where the borrower just hands over the property documents, is still deemed a charge.
And so it's compulsorily registrable under the Companies Act?
Absolutely. The regulatory net is cast as widely as possible to make sure no secured asset can be hidden from public view.
Okay, so this is where the conversation turns from the general idea of security to commercial reality. The law recognizes two fundamentally different types of charges, and the difference really dictates how a company can run its day-to-day business. Let's start with the rigid one, the fixed charge.
The fixed charge is what most people naturally imagine when they think of security. It's a charge that's placed on specific assets that are clearly identified and, permanent in nature right at the time the charge is created.
The anchors of the business?
The anchors of the business. Land, buildings, specific high-value, non-movable machinery. Things that don't change.
And what's the commercial implication for the borrower? So if our company, Pearl Electronics, has a fixed charge on its office building, what can they not do with that building?
Well, the commercial restriction is crystal clear. The borrowing company is generally not permitted to sell or transfer those specific assets during the charge period without first getting the charge holder's explicit written consent.
The bank's permission.
The bank's permission. They have a direct, fixed claim on that specific asset. Now, the company can continue to use the building to run its operations, of course, but the legal status of that building is essentially frozen until the debt is satisfied.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for permanent assets, but contrast that rigidity with the absolute commercial necessity of the floating charge. Why did the law even need this mechanism?
Imagine the alternative. I mean, let's take Smart Shoes Limited, a shoe manufacturer. They secure a working capital loan against their inventory, the leather, the rubber, the finished shoes on the shelf.
Right.
If that security interest was a fixed charge, what would happen?
Well, they couldn't do anything. They wouldn't be able to use the raw leather to make new shoes, and they certainly couldn't sell the finished shoes on the showroom floor.
The business would instantly suffocate.
Which is the exact opposite of what the loan was for in the first place.
Precisely. The loan is intended to facilitate business operations, not paralyze them. And that's why the floating charge was created. It's a charge on assets, or a class of assets, that are, by their very nature, fluctuating or changing.
Raw materials, stock and trade, debtors, the classic examples.
Exactly. So this charge floats above the changing inventory. It covers the assets that are there today and the assets that'll be there tomorrow.
That's the conceptual genius of it, isn't it? The company must be permitted to use and dispose of these assets in the ordinary course of business.
It's essential. If a customer walks into a retail showroom that has a floating charge on its stock and, buys a pair of shoes, that buyer takes the item free of charge. The security interest doesn't follow the shoes out the door.
It just shifts to the cash they received and the stock that's left.
Right. The floating charge is essentially dormant. It's just waiting. It doesn't actually attach to any single asset until a critical event occurs.
And that critical event is crystallization. This is the most dramatic moment in the life of a floating charge. It's the moment the charge stops floating and, bam, becomes fixed instantly on whatever assets are available at that particular date.
It's the financial equivalent of a company-wide lockdown, where the lender just slams the brakes. The floating charge allows commerce to happen, but it remains dormant until one of several critical triggers is pulled.
So what are the primary triggers? What causes this sudden transition from floating to fixed?
Well, first and foremost is a fundamental breach of the terms and conditions of the loan agreement. Usually that means they've defaulted on a repayment.
Okay.
Second, if the company ceases to continue its business, it's closing down operations. Third, if the creditor enforces the security by actively invoking their right to take possession or, sell the assets. And finally, if the company goes into liquidation or enters any formal insolvency process.
Let's put this into the real world with Prism Limited. They had a floating charge on their warehouse stock, secured by ABC Bank. If Prism Limited fails to make a single loan payment,
ABC Bank can declare a breach and trigger crystallization. Correct. The moment that charge crystallizes, the charge that was just floating over this ever-changing stock instantly converts to a fixed charge on the stock that is present at that exact moment.
So 5,000 pairs of shoes and 100 hides of leather or whatever is there.
Whatever is there. And once it's crystallized, that stock can neither be sold nor used further by the company. The company's operational flexibility is instantly revoked, and the lender gains a priority claim on those specific assets. Understanding this journey from fluid security to a rigid fixed claim is really the first big conceptual hurdle we have to clear.
Okay, so we've established the creation of the charge. Now we have to move into the legal machinery that makes that charge enforceable against the rest of the world. Section 77, the duty to register. If the charge is the foundation, registration is the public notice tower built right on top of it.
And the law assigns the primary duty unequivocally. It says it shall be the duty of the company creating the charge to register the particulars with the Registrar of Companies, or ROC.
And the clock starts immediately. The original statutory period is a very rigid 30 days from the date of creation of the charge.
It is. And the mechanism for doing this involves submitting the necessary forms, Form CHG-1 for most charges, or Form CHG-9 if they're creating a charge on debentures. And this documentation must be accompanied by a copy of the actual underlying legal instrument creating the charge.
The mortgage deed itself.
Right, and it has to be signed by both the company and the charge holder. That signed instrument is crucial because, as we'll discuss later, the public filing is often just a summary. The instrument is the detailed contract.
Now, since the stakes are so high for the lender, they could lose their security, the law provides a crucial safeguard. We'll detail it more under Section 78, but the key insight here is that if the company fails to act within those initial 30 days,
The charge holder, so the bank, has the right to step in and register it themselves.
it's a self-preservation measure. The company might be negligent, but the bank, whose entire security is on the line, has every single incentive to correct that omission.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into the deadlines, let's briefly touch on a compliance point. Verification. The verification certificate that goes with the filing. It actually differs based on where the charged property is located.
Which makes sense from a jurisdictional standpoint.
Right, so you've got two tracks. If the instrument relates solely to property situated outside India, the verification is quite flexible. A director or secretary can do it. But because verifying foreign assets can be tricky, it can also be issued under the hand of some person other than the company who is interested in the mortgage or charge.
So a third party with skin in the game can verify it?
Exactly. It acknowledges the international complexities. But if the property is right here under the ROC's nose, if it's situated in India, wholly or partly,
Then the rules get much stricter.
much stricter. The verification certificate must be issued only under the hand of a director or company secretary of the company or an authorized officer of the charge holder. That broader third-party option is not available. The law demands direct accountability for domestic assets.
Okay, here we go. This is the legal mountain we have to climb. The entire system of extension deadlines went through a massive overhaul, and you absolutely must know the historical inflection point. November 2nd, 2018. 02/11/2018.
That date divides the entire regulatory regime. The time limits for registration are radically different, depending on whether the charge was created before or on or after this date.
And the reason for this change is fascinating. Before 2018, the system was, let's say, relatively forgiving. It allowed up to 300 days for registration. But this created too much uncertainty. Companies could essentially hide liabilities for months.
Right, so the change aimed to introduce extreme discipline.
And finite deadlines. So let's use a structural mnemonic to organize the three main phases of compliance. We call it the CDS slogan.
CDS.
C for creation, which is the initial 30 days. D for the delay period, the first extension. And S for the sanction period, which is the final, most expensive extension.
Okay, let's start with the older, more lenient regime. Charges created before 02/11/2018. So for those, the initial period was 30 days. If you miss that, the ROC could grant a delay period extension up to 300 days from the date of creation. You just had to apply and pay some additional fees.
Nearly 10 months of grace.
A lot of time. But if they missed even that 300 days, this is where a specific one-time legislative remedy came in. The final sanction period for these truly historical lapses mandated that registration must occur within 6 months from 02/11/2018.
The date the law changed.
Exactly. If they missed that final 6-month window, that charge was permanently void against the liquidator. That was the last chance.
Okay, now let's focus on the modern, much stricter regime. This is what applies to nearly all current transactions. Charges created on or after 02/11/2018.
The initial period is still 30 days. But if you miss it, you hit delay period 1, and it's short. The ROC may grant an extension up to 60 days total from creation.
So that's just 30 additional days.
And just one extra month with additional fees. And if that 60-day window is missed, we hit the final punitive stage,
Yeah.
the sanction period. This is where the doors really start to slam shut. If registration isn't done within 60 days, the registrar can permit it within a further period of 60 days. Now, this is the key. This means the absolute hard stop maximum time limit for registering a charge created post-2018 is 120 days from its creation.
You cannot go beyond 120 days under any circumstances.
None. And the price for this extreme delay is the mandatory payment of prescribed ad valorem fees.
And that distinction is crucial. You mentioned ad valorem fees. For the listener, we need to stress why that fee structure is so punishing, especially compared to just a fixed penalty.
Well, ad valorem means according to value. It means the fee is calculated in proportion to the estimated value of the transaction concerned.
So it's based on the loan amount.
Exactly. If Renuka Soaps and Detergents Limited is late on a 10 crore loan, the penalty is proportional to 10 crore. If a huge conglomerate missed the deadline on a 500 crore loan, the penalty is proportional to that massive amount. It's designed to be crippling if the debt is large.
It forces compliance within that 60-day window.
You'd have to be crazy to risk it.
Let's trace that timeline precisely using the Renuka Soaps example. Let's say the charge was created on March 10th, 2024.
Okay, so the initial 30 days expired on April 9th.
Scenario 1. They realized their mistake and filed on May 2nd, 2024. That's 53 days after creation.
They fall squarely within that extended 60-day window. They show sufficient cause, file Form CHG-1, and they only pay the additional fees. They're saved from the big proportional penalty.
Okay. Scenario 2. They are extremely negligent. They realized the mistake on June 7th, 2024. That's 89 days after creation.
Now they're outside the 60 days. They have to use that final non-negotiable grace period, the further period of 60 days, which pushes them towards the 120-day maximum.
And this is where it gets expensive.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
This requires an application, proof of sufficient cause, and critically, the mandatory payment of those massive proportional ad valorem fees. The law makes absolutely no exception for a late filing after 120 days for a new charge. It's a cliff edge.
And regardless of which delay period we're talking about, the application for an extension has to be supported by a declaration from a director or secretary stating that the late filing does not adversely affect the rights of any other intervening creditors.
That's the core regulatory concern. The ROC must always check that no third party got hurt because of the company's delay.
Okay, so once the company successfully navigates this bureaucratic minefield, what do they get?
The registrar issues a certificate of registration. And this certificate is not just a receipt. It's conclusive evidence that all the legal requirements of Chapter 6 have been complied with.
So that certificate form CHG2 for creation or CHG3 for a modification, it settles any future legal dispute about the procedural validity of the registration itself.
Exactly. Once the bank has that piece of paper, their security is virtually unassailable on grounds of a filing error.
One final quick point on Section 77. There's an exemption, right, regarding the central bank?
Yes, a necessary carve-out for systemic stability. Section 77 does not apply to charges created by a banking company in favor of the Reserve Bank of India for certain types of loans. These are transactions related to monetary control and don't need the same public transparency as standard corporate borrowing.
Okay, so why all this obsession with deadlines and public filings? It's because public registration solves the most existential risk in corporate finance: the ability for a company to pledge the same asset to 3 different lenders.
Right.
And it solves this through a powerful legal fiction known as constructive notice in Section 80.
The conceptual logic is beautiful in its simplicity and, frankly, chilling in its effect. All registered charges are public documents, easily accessible on the MCA portal. The doctrine establishes a legal fiction that registration constitutes constructive notice.
Which means implied or deemed knowledge.
It means the law is basically saying, we made the information public. If you chose not to check the register before lending money or buying the property, that's your problem, not ours.
Ignorance is no defense.
None whatsoever. Section 80 states that any person acquiring the property, assets, undertakings, or any interest therein shall be deemed to have notice of the charge from the date of such registration. It just completely removes the defense of ignorance. It forces every potential participant, lenders, investors, buyers, to do their due diligence.
Let's apply this. Vishnu Marketing Limited registers a charge on their factory with Alpha Commercial Bank. Later, Vishnu sells that same factory to Neeraj, maybe claiming it's free and clear. Neeraj fails to check the register.
If the bank later seeks to enforce the mortgage, Neeraj cannot claim, I didn't know the building was mortgaged. The registration acts as irrefutable proof. Neeraj is legally presumed to have checked the public record and acquired that asset with full knowledge of the encumbrance.
If he'd done the mandatory check, he would have seen the risk.
He would have. It's on him.
Okay, now let's talk about the absolute disaster scenario: non-registration. The charge is created, the money is borrowed, the security instrument is signed, but the company fails to register the particulars within that 120-day maximum window. What happens to the poor lender?
It's an instantaneous demotion. Under Section 77(3), a non-registered charge is void against the liquidator or any other creditor.
Void? That's a strong word.
It is. The charge holder, who signed the mortgage document believing they were protected, is instantly relegated to the status of an unsecured creditor.
That is the commercial catastrophe. But can we clarify what exactly is lost? Is the debt itself canceled? Does the company not owe the money anymore?
No, the debt is not canceled. Section 774 is clear. Non-registration does not prejudice the contract or obligation for debt repayment itself. The borrower still owes the money. The debt is still enforceable by suit.
But the security is gone.
The security itself is lost. And that means when the company goes into liquidation, the lender cannot stand outside the general pool and claim that specific asset they thought they had secured. They had to stand in line with all the other general unsecured creditors.
Which usually means getting pennies on the dollar.
If they're lucky. This inherent risk is what drives the fierce competition we call the priority rule. It clarifies why the date of registration is the only thing that matters, not the date the security was initially signed.
Right, and there's a specific proviso for this.
Yes, the third proviso to Section 77(1) emphasizes this rule. It says subsequent registration shall not prejudice any right acquired in respect of the property before the charge was actually registered. In other words, if someone else legally claimed or secured that asset while you were delaying, your late registration is irrelevant. You lose.
Let's make this a concrete story. The Vasuta Medicos Limited scenario, the race to the ROC.
Okay, imagine Vasuta Medicos needs capital fast. Bank A creates a charge on their land on June 1st, 2024. But for whatever reason, they fail to register immediately. Bank B comes along later, does their due diligence, sees the land as unencumbered on the public register, and creates a charge on the same property on June 18th. Bank B rushes to the ROC and registers its charge on June 26th.
Meanwhile, Bank A finally wakes up
And registers on August 12th.
If Vasuta Medicos goes under and the land is sold, who gets paid first?
Bank B. No question. They registered on June 26th. When Bank B registered, there was no prior charge on the record. Bank A's subsequent registration in August cannot retroactively destroy the security interest that Bank B legally acquired in June.
So this powerfully illustrates that in the world of corporate lending, the date of creation is just the starting gun.
The date of registration is the finish line, and whoever crosses it first wins.
So we know the stakes are existential for the lender. If the company is negligent, the lender's security is at risk. This is why Section 78 grants the lender, the charge holder, the essential power to protect themselves by registering the charge if the company drops the ball.
It's a critical mechanism of self-help. If the company fails to register within that initial 30 days, the lender can apply to the registrar to register it.
Can you walk us through the process flow here, using that safety net imagery?
Sure. The flow provides due process, even when the company is failing its duty. First, the company misses the initial 30-day window.
Okay.
Second, the charge holder applies to the registrar for registration. Third, the registrar, being fair, issues a notice to the company, giving them 14 days to show cause why the lender shouldn't be allowed to register the charge.
So the company gets a chance to explain or object?
They do. But if the company raises no objection or can't provide sufficient cause within those 14 days, the registrar just proceeds to register the charge based on the lender's application.
And since the lender is performing a duty that was legally the company's, the law allows for cost recovery, right?
Absolutely. The charge holder is entitled to recover any fees, including additional fees, paid for this remedial registration directly from the company. It's a mechanism designed to ensure that the primary victim of the failure, the secured party, can salvage their position without taking a financial hit for it.
Okay, we've tracked the charge through creation and registration. Now we need to follow it through its active life, covering necessary changes and its eventual discharge. A charge is rarely static, especially over a long period.
That's right. Commercial transactions evolve, and so must the public record. Section 79 makes it clear that the rigid rules of Section 77, the deadlines, the forms, the verification, must also apply to two other scenarios.
The first being acquisition.
Right. If a company acquires any property subject to a charge, so if Company A buys assets from Company B and those assets are already mortgaged, the acquiring Company A must register the charge in its own name. The liability travels with the asset.
And the second is modification.
Any modification in the terms, conditions, extent, or operation of a registered charge. If the underlying security contract changes, the public has to be informed.
What are some practical examples of a modification that's significant enough to require mandatory registration?
Well, they can range from procedural to highly substantive. A procedural change might be altering the repayment schedule or changing the interest rate if it's not just a standard bank rate change. But substantive modifications are things like enhancing or decreasing the loan limits, or, crucially, the partial release of assets from the security. If the bank agrees to release a plot of land from the mortgage, that has to be registered.
This brings us to a specific financial term we introduced earlier. Ceding a pari passu charge. That sounds like a major alteration of priority.
It is a profound shift in risk. Pari passu is Latin for on equal footing. A pari passu charge holder is entitled to share risk and recovery proportionally with other charge holders.
So if there are two banks, they both get paid out at the same time from the sale of the asset?
Exactly. Ceding this right means that charge holder A agrees to move down the priority list. They are giving up their equal footing to become a secondary charge holder. Because this directly impacts their recovery potential, this act of ceding must be registered immediately as a modification.
And just like with creation, the registration of a modification leads to the issue of Form CHG3, the Certificate of Modification, which becomes the conclusive proof that the change has been noted publicly.
Correct. Now, the ideal end to any charge is satisfaction. This is the point when the loan is fully repaid or the security is legally released. Under Section 82, the company must report this satisfaction in full to the registrar using Form CHG4.
And the initial timeline for reporting satisfaction is strict, just like creation, within 30 days of payment or satisfaction. But the leniency for delays is much greater here, isn't it?
Yes, and this is a clear regulatory distinction. The maximum time for creating a charge post-2018 is 120 days, full stop. But if a company misses the satisfaction deadline, the registrar can allow intimation within a total period of 300 days from payment, subject to an application and additional fees.
Why the massive difference? 120 days to create, but 300 to file satisfaction.
The regulatory risk profile has fundamentally changed. When a charge is created but not registered, the public is unaware of an encumbrance, and other creditors are prejudiced.
Right. They might lend money thinking an asset is free and clear.
Exactly. But when a charge is satisfied but not registered, the public is incorrectly informed that a debt still exists. This harms the company's ability to borrow or sell, but it doesn't prejudice other creditors. The liability is actually gone, so the law offers a much longer window for rectification.
Once the company files that intimation, the registrar has to verify it.
Verification is done by contacting the other party. The registrar must send a notice to the charge holder, calling on them to show cause within a time not exceeding 14 days as to why the satisfaction should be recorded. If the charge holder is silent, the satisfaction is recorded.
But the fastest, most streamlined way to handle this is if the bank cooperates from the start.
Absolutely. No notice is required if the intimation, the Form CHG4, is already signed by the charge holder. If the bank, having received its money, signs the Declaration of Satisfaction, the ROC can bypass the 14-day waiting period and issue Form No, CHG5, the Certificate of Registration of Satisfaction, almost immediately.
Okay, this next section, Section 83, is the final fail-safe against negligence. What if both the company and the lender are negligent? The debt is paid, but the public record still shows the asset is mortgaged. The company is commercially crippled.
This is a powerful administrative relief mechanism. Section 83 grants the ROC the power to make entries of satisfaction and release, even if no intimation is received from the company. This power is triggered if sufficient evidence is shown to the registrar that the debt was paid or the property was released.
So if we look at that descriptive scenario of Ranjit, who acquired a mortgaged property from PQR Limited and settled the bank dues himself, if PQR and the bank don't file the satisfaction, Ranjit is left holding a property that looks encumbered on the public record.
Right. So Ranjit, as an interested person who settled the debt, can approach the registrar with his proof bank statements, maybe the sub-registrar's notes confirming the discharge. Since the evidence satisfies the registrar can use their power under Section 83 to enter the memorandum of satisfaction.
Which clears the public record and provides relief.
Exactly. The registrar must, however, inform the affected parties within 30 days of making this independent entry.
Finally, what if the situation descends into default and the charge holder has to seize control? That serious change in operational control must also be publicly transparent.
It must. Section 84 mandates this. If a receiver or manager is appointed, either by a court order or through a power in the loan instrument, to manage the charged property, the person making the appointment must give notice, along with a copy of the order, to both the company and the registrar.
And the regulatory urgency is high here. What's the deadline?
Notice must be given within a strict 30 days of the order or appointment. Furthermore, when that person eventually ceases to hold the appointment, notice must also be given immediately to the company and the registrar, using Form CHG6. This ensures the public record accurately reflects who is legally in charge of those assets.
Okay, our final major section focuses on the structure that sustains this whole system. The dual register system, the penalties for failure, and the final administrative remedy for honest mistakes.
We have to understand that the law mandates two registers of charges. One is the official public record, and one is the internal audit trail.
Let's start with the public one.
First, The register kept by the registrar under Section 81. This contains particulars of all registered charges. Functionally, this is maintained entirely electronically on the Ministry of Corporate Affairs portal. And this register is open to inspection by any person on payment of a fee. This is the cornerstone of that whole concept of constructive notice.
And then we have the register kept by the company under Section 85. Why the need for internal duplication?
It serves internal stakeholders and provides a clear audit trail. Every company must keep a detailed register of charges in Form CHG-7 at its registered office. This includes every single charge, floating charge, acquisition, modification, and satisfaction. And entries have to be made forthwith immediately after the event.
The inspection rights for this internal register are important, right? They differentiate between stakeholders.
They do. For the internal register and the instrument creating the charge, members or creditors of the company have privileged access. They can inspect both the register and the instrument without fees.
But other people have to pay.
Any other person may inspect them, but only upon payment of prescribed fees. This ensures that the primary financial risk bearers, the owners and the lenders, have free, immediate access to this vital information.
Now, to help our listeners memorize the archival requirements, let's use another mnemonic.
Okay, for preservation periods, we use the mnemonic RIP8.
RIP8.
The register, Form CHG-7, must be preserved permanently. The instrument creating or modifying the charge must be preserved for 8 years from the date of satisfaction of the charge.
So the summary register is permanent, but the detailed contracts only need to be held for 8 years after the loan is paid off.
Exactly. They must be held long enough to withstand any future audit or legal challenge.
The stick behind all these rules is, of course, severe penalties. If a company commits a general default, failing to register a charge, failing to file satisfaction, what's the financial hit under Section 86(1)?
The penalties are high enough to discourage negligence. The company itself is liable to a penalty of 5 lakh rupees. Additionally, every officer of the company who is deemed in default is liable to a penalty of 50,000 rupees.
It's designed to catch the board's attention.
Immediately. But the situation escalates dramatically if the failure isn't just negligence, but malicious deception.
Right. Section 86(2).
This section addresses the deliberate misuse of the system, furnishing false or incorrect information or knowingly suppressing any material information. That moves beyond a civil penalty and is considered fraud. Any person guilty of this becomes liable for action under Section 447, which is the comprehensive section for fraud, and includes imprisonment.
Okay, so the deadlines are unforgiving, the penalties are high, but what if the default was an honest mistake? Accidental omission, administrative inadvertence. Section 87 is the final safety net, the administrative relief.
It is. This section empowers the central government, in practice, the regional directors, to order rectification. This is the ultimate court of appeal for procedural errors where deadlines were missed.
Like what, specifically?
For example, an omission in giving the satisfaction intimation, especially if the filing is missed beyond that generous 300-day window. Or an omission or misstatement of any particulars in filings related to creation, modification, or satisfaction.
But critically, the central government can't grant this relief if it harms a third party. What are the preconditions?
The government has to be satisfied that the default was accidental or due to inadvertence or sufficient cause. But the most vital condition is that the rectification did not prejudice the position of creditors or shareholders.
So if another creditor checked the record during the delay, saw no charge, and acted on that information,
The government will deny rectification to protect that intervening creditor. This provision balances mercy for technical error with the supreme need to ensure equitable treatment for everyone who relies on that public record.
this completes the comprehensive life cycle of the charge, from its conceptual creation right up through its archival and potential rectification.
It is a dense, high-stakes framework, and it's all built on the principle of transparency.
Now, before we wrap up, let's synthesize the 3 most vital learning points for you to carry forward from this. My first takeaway involves understanding the company's operating flexibility. You absolutely must know the conceptual difference between a fixed charge on permanent assets, restricting sale, and a floating charge on fluid inventory, which allows normal business operations right up until the moment of crystallization.
My second key takeaway is the power of the law of priority. The date of registration grants priority, not the date of creation. Never forget those regulatory deadlines for new charges created post-02/11/2018, an absolute maximum of 120 days from creation. Missing that window relegates you to an unsecured creditor status.
And the penalty for delays outside 60 days is the proportional crippling imposition of those ad valorem fees. And my third most structural takeaway is the function of Section 80, the doctrine of constructive notice. The law dictates that any serious party dealing with a company's assets is deemed to have knowledge of the public register. This means due diligence on the MCA portal isn't an option. It is a mandatory legal defense mechanism.
To leave you with a final thought that pushes beyond compliance into deep due diligence. We stated that the certificate of registration is conclusive evidence that all legal requirements have been met.
Right.
However, the public filing, the Form CHG-1, is often just a summary of the charge particulars. The underlying security instrument, the mortgage deed, is where the deep covenants and restrictions actually live.
So, if an external creditor checks the public register, sees a legally compliant summary, and lends money, how far can that creditor rely purely on the public register being conclusive evidence of procedural compliance?
Versus their commercial need to demand and analyze the specific, detailed instrument creating the charge. The summary satisfies the law, but the fine print dictates the commercial future. This tension forces a deeper appreciation of the due diligence required to lend money safely.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the mandatory architecture of corporate security and financial transparency.
Master these deadlines and concepts. We'll see you next time.